Welcome to the Citizens Reporter. I'm your host and editor, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. The Citizens Reporter is a weekly news cablecast program that you can see on public access channels as well as on YouTube. And at the end of this program, you'll see how you can subscribe to our news programs, 3 of them weekly, and you can subscribe to them on YouTube and be notified of the new news program each week. Now, to help me this week with our news is our regular citizen reporter, Mr. Mark Bradley. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I'm doing a little bit different than I usually do because I usually talk about state and federal issues. And today I'm going to be talking more about what's happening in my own area of Maplewood, which if you have read in the Tribune, they had an article that said the Myth Live owners sued to stop foreclosure. And it makes almost the impression that the myth is going to be gone because it has all types of financial problems. And the truth of the matter is it does not. And when we did an in-depth reading of the article, it said that the myth is very successful in going on. So for the people of Maplewood, it is a viable and vital part of the city that's still paying its taxes and paying for all the costs it has right now. But I thought I'd pass that to you, and you can explain a little bit more on it.
Yes, and Mr. Bradley, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention, because I think it really does demonstrate how it's important to read beyond the headlines. And certainly one of the things we try to do on these news programs is that we want to go beyond the headlines and say, what are the details in all of this? And so this particular article, as Mr. Bradley indicated, is in the Pioneer Press of October 10th, 2019. And what has occurred is that the bank had started foreclosure proceedings against the owners of the real estate. Now, keep in mind, the owners of the real estate are different than the owners of the nightclub business who lease that property and who run the nightclub business. So I think that that's an important distinction here. But as it turns out, when you're looking at this article, it turns out that the mortgage, while it may have been in default at one point in time, that in September, a payment of $153,000 was made to bring it up to date, and that it is not in default. And so the Myth Live owners have brought forth a civil lawsuit to stop any foreclosure proceeding that might be in the works. And so, as Mr. Bradley indicated, the concerts are still going on. It is still a very viable entertainment location in Maplewood, and we have been covering this business and their interaction with the Maplewood City Council on another program, another news program. We had the copy of the civil complaint that has been filed against the city of Maplewood for inappropriately trying to curtail their business when they have no legal reason to do so. So again, thank you, Mr. Bradley.
Right, and now I'll jump to, we had a council meeting on September 23rd that was addressing issues at the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting. So I have 2 areas to look at, but the number one area I'd like to talk about right now happens to be what's happened at the end, where you had a presentation by Fire Chief Lucan that kind of drives me crazy, because I had a whole bunch of questions to ask, and I didn't realize that they were going to let anybody speak at this meeting, and they did, but without any public notice. There was no reason for me to show up to ask these questions. So I had them written up, and I was going to hang around for it. So I had the questions here.
So in other words, what you're saying, Mr. Bradley, is that you went to the meeting at the beginning of the meeting
Right.
for the issue on the agenda that was of interest to you. that had to do with the North End study.
Right.
Correct? And then after that was done with, because there was no notification on the agenda and the city council has removed public comment from the council agenda, you didn't think that they were going to be allowing public comment, so you left.
Right, because of they were going to be, and I did have a notice that they were going to be discussing it, but since they don't allow public comment, it was under new business. They had the fire station realignment.
We do have a lot of film footage with regard to this issue of closing down another Maplewood fire station. That will bring it down to now a total of 2 fire stations. When I was mayor, which wasn't that long ago, we had 5 fire stations, and with the shape of Maplewood, the geographical shape that it is sort of like an upside down L, with that lower leg of Maplewood going all the way and neighboring and boundarying with Newport, it makes you think, how can the fire department, which by the way serves as the ambulance department in Maplewood, how can they serve the residents of Maplewood with only 2 fire stations? Now they claim that they can, but they talk about a response time of 10 minutes for most calls. Now, I will also tell you that when I was mayor of Maplewood, which again was not that long ago, I was elected in 2005 for a 4-year term, it was very routine that the call response in Maplewood was 6 minutes, 6 to 7 minutes. And during a case where after I was no longer mayor, and I had a case where a family, I had some concerns about service to their home, and I represented them. We actually had Chief Lucan testifying under oath that the response time was 6 minutes. So this idea that now their new big plan to have only 2 fire stations is going to better properly serve Maplewood with a response time of 10 minutes is actually insane.
And that's the biggest problem we have, is that, and that's why we probably should start going with the cliffs here, but my biggest question is, should I be asking the questions beforehand or after? Because of one point I think would be important is to take a look at one statement which was made, the north and central 2 stations. But the other point is that I wanted to ask is, are they both active? And my wife and I took a trip back last night to go by both stations. I wanted to add that at the very beginning. So I went by the one that's called the Gladstone, which they're calling the central station, and kind of saying
and let's give our viewers some context. That particular station is near the intersection of Frost and English,
right,
where they are going to be concentrating high-density housing at 58 units per acre.
Right.
So that is the location of that fire station currently.
And the thing is that when I went past that station, it had, I believe, 4 bays, and they're all lit, and there was a fire engine, or actually a emergency response unit that was leaving one of the bays there. I then went to the other one, and I'm trying to think of the street again. So,
and that's off of, and the other one then is off of Hazelwood.
That's what I was looking for.
And County Road C. So
right,
that is approximately probably 2 miles north of the one in Gladstone that's at Frost and English.
Right.
So it's about 2 miles north. It's closer to the mall. So that gives you an idea that if you were to draw a line from that fire station in Gladstone to the Maplewood Mall, along that trajectory is where you would find that Hazelwood
right,
fire station. And it's pretty much equal distance between Gladstone Fire Station and the Maplewood Mall. So that's where that's located.
So my wife and I went by the Hazelwood station, and we took a look at there. No vehicles parked by it. So we believe that it was abandoned at this point. They had a light inside that was reflecting off the windows to show that It was illuminated inside, but there was no action happening in there.
And there weren't any of the full-time firefighters with their vehicles parked outside of the fire station either, were there?
That's right.
Because I noticed that very same thing 2 weeks ago when I drove by there, because I wanted to see exactly what was going on with the Hazelwood Fire Station. And one sure thing to know whether or not, if it's active or not, is if your full-time firefighters have their cars parked outside of the fire station. And there was not a car in the parking lot. And it looked pretty dark.
Right. So what I'm trying to get at is, if you listen to our clips coming up, the biggest thing you hear here is and this is something that you probably heard when you went to church, the sin of omission. The omission of when the actual Gladstone fire station was built, which was about 2000,
Yeah,
in
about
that area there.
2000. Yeah. Mhm.
And they also were obligated to replace the roof on it because the city didn't even get a warranty on the construction for the original station. So we, as the public, have already picked up the cost for that. Now, I found it intriguing.
Within 20 years.
Yes.
Yes.
And the thing is that when you listen to the words, the second chief that came up, which I believe I want to use, well, you probably catch, Mike. He was talking about duplication. And yes, the services are duplicate between the two, but the fact is the Gladstone is a larger facility to start out with. It is actually active at this present time, and the Hazelwood is not.
And I would say, Mr. Bradley, you know, I'm glad that you picked up on that language of him saying that these stations are duplicative.
Yes.
Well, isn't that the point? Is that your fire stations should be duplicative because they are positioned in and around your community so that they can serve the neighborhoods appropriately that they are located in. So they should be duplicated.
Right.
And that they should have the same equipment and they should have the same amount of coverage.
And also, pay attention to something else that's happening here. They're saying that because of both of these have problems, we should tear them both down. But the problems for the Gladstone station, first of all, they insinuate that the problems for Hazelwood, which happens to be having no bed facilities.
Oh, sleeping quarters.
Sleeping
yes.
quarters for the firemen, is also applicative to the Gladstone, but it does have sleeping quarters at the Gladstone facility, the way I understand. And the thing is that the true issues, when they did bring them out, by the way they insinuated, making it sound like they also said, they have admission and administration office problems. And then they said storage was the other thing.
Well, and keep in mind, currently the fire / paramedic ambulance department, I mean, they've always had their offices there at the Gladstone station, and
Right.
that's where their offices have been for the last 20 years.
Oh, I know.
And if for some reason they feel that they don't have the right facilities there, I think that they do have room that they could actually expand at the Gladstone station.
Of course.
Now, there's always that question there at the Hazelwood station, whether or not they have enough property to expand there. But they could build certainly a 2-story building,
Right.
and that would be the way that they could expand that. But that still does not address this whole issue of response times, because since Maplewood performs the services of an ambulance service out of the fire department, that is their primary objective, because of all the calls that come into the fire department for service. Over 80% of those calls are for medical assistance of some kind. So they're not really a fire department. They are an ambulance paramedic department. That's what they are.
Right.
And so they should be looking at it from that particular focus, because once you have a heart attack, can you wait 10 minutes? I mean, that's the question.
Right.
Can you wait 10 minutes? if you're having a heart attack? Can you wait 10 minutes? 10 minutes if you've had some type of blunt trauma injury. It's
But that also includes the fact that they have the north and the south units both open. What is it? Well, they're rebuilding the one station that's supposed to replace the two north end stations.
right, exactly.
And that means it's going to be more than 10 minutes because they were factoring on both stations being active at this point. I want to add one other thing, that when we talk about Gladstone, it also has a meeting area, and it is it's a 40 by 60 area, or at least 40 by 40. It's a massive room for meeting at the Gladstone station. So if they need the area for admin or storage, they have that luxury of using that.
And that's a good point, Mr. Bradley, is that Gladstone fire station does have a huge meeting area and also a kitchen that is accompanying it. That's right next to it. It's got a servery window to it even. And if for some reason they wanted to remodel that particular fire station building so that it was more conducive to having a full-time fire department staff and having more officing space, they could use that. And I know that we've talked before on these programs that, well, this is, some of our viewers might say, but then you're eliminating the meeting room, the training room, except a point you have made, Mr. Bradley, very eloquently before in the past, is that they just built their $2.5 million Wakefield Pavilion down the street less than a half a mile away. And that is specifically designed for meetings, for training events. It has a pretend kitchen with a servery even. So there you go. They can just go down the street a half a mile away to their Wakefield Pavilion that they just built and have their meetings there. How easy that would be.
But you got to understand, Diane, that wouldn't be the money grab they want to do. Basically, what they want to do is transfer more money out of Maplewood to somebody else's coffer, like when they did the fire training facility, when they gave the YMCA a building, which we still maintain as a city for YMCA, but we can't even use the meeting rooms there. That's why I had to build the Wakefield Park.
Right. And some of our clips are actually going to touch on some of those topics that you just brought up. So I know that we have a lot of clips, and this topic is a huge topic for Maplewood, having the closure of yet another fire station. And so what we don't cover in this program this week, next week we will continue the report because it is a very important report for the people of Maplewood and even the surrounding communities. And the reason it's important for the surrounding communities is because there are joint aid agreements with Maplewood, with the surrounding communities. And so you see, if Maplewood is not able to serve and provide the services to their residents along the boundaries of Maplewood in the time that's required, then they pull from those services of fire, ambulance, from the neighboring communities under these agreements. And I live on the west side of Maplewood, for instance, and it is very common that for calls for service on the west side of Maplewood, we don't see Maplewood response. We actually see the response coming from St. Paul or Little Canada. And so that is why it's important for the neighboring communities, whether or not if Maplewood is providing proper services in their fire and their ambulance department, because if they're not, then they are pulling from the resources of other communities to serve those people who need help. And that is a critical issue that I don't know that any of the council have asked a question on, and nobody has figured into the mix.
Yes, and why don't we start out then with the first clip?
Sounds good. Well, this is from the council meeting of September 23rd.
That we've put this on the agenda. First of all, you won't need to act on item B if you don't approve item A. So that's one thing. The other thing, that we're going through this process because it takes a very long time from when we start from design to the feasibility study, and then we hire an architect. And really, we won't be going out for bid on any new building until November probably. That's if we start the process tonight. So that's why we did that. Normally, we don't make assumptions that council is going to support moving forward, but we really felt that this was something that was timely and that we really needed to prepare for this as a first step tonight, should you choose to do the consolidation. So with that, Mayor, we have Chief Mondor, Chief of EMS, to lead off the presentation. I think there probably are a couple of co-presenters as well.
That is City Manager Melinda Coleman. I just find it fascinating that she says, you know, this is a very long process. So we're going to get it started tonight. And if you don't vote on in the affirmative on point A, which of course the viewers at home have no idea what point A is, then you won't need to vote on point B. And again, the viewers at home have no idea what point B is. It's all secret. Now, Mr. Bradley, I know you have the agenda here. Well, let's just see what it might say here. Is the point A and point B. Point A is consolidate the central and north fire stations. Basically, close one of the fire stations and just have one of the two in operation. And then B is develop a professional services agreement with Wold Architects and Engineers to conduct a fire station needs assessment and design recommendations. Now, City Manager Coleman, she indicates that this is a long process. However, if the council votes that night, September 23rd, to consolidate two of the fire stations, which means closing one of them, that by November, they will have the architects already signed up and ready to go. Now, this meeting is at the end of September. The amount of time between the end of September, September 23rd, 2019, and November 2019 is, well, a month.
Right.
Now, that is the definition of a long time.
Well, also you gotta take a look at the fact that they said needs. So the fact is they're asking the architect who's going to be designing a building to replace the buildings to also determine if they even have a need for the buildings.
Or the need for how it should be constructed,
Right.
or how much storage. And you see, these are all the factors that they should have already figured out, if that is in case what they think they should be doing as part of their due diligence. Obviously, the architect needs to know that information so he can put his design together properly. But your question is that how much of this due diligence have they actually done in advance, or are they relying simply on that architect to figure it out?
And we kind of listen later on and find out. And that's why I'd like you to pay real close attention to when I was talking about that sin of omission. So please pay attention to what's coming up.
Right. Well, let's continue as the presentation moves forward.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, thank you for entertaining us at this late hour. I will have a couple other presenters, Chief Lucan and President of local IAFF 4470, Ray Crawford. Before I kick this over to Chief Lucan, who's going to give a brief historical background.
Now, Chief Lucan has been the chief of the Maplewood Fire Department 20 years. He started on the Maplewood Fire Department, I understand, as a paid per call firefighter, and so he has always served on the Maplewood Fire Department as a firefighter and serving in the capacity of EMS, emergency medical service, and going on medical calls. So he's been around a long time, and many people believe that they just keep him on at City Hall to wait out the clock for his retirement, that he really isn't doing that much substantial in the way of public policy development. And this is almost telling in this introduction, in that they don't have the fire chief in charge of giving the presentation of the public policy behind this. Instead, the fire chief, Lucan, is relegated to giving the historical perspective of only talking about what has gone on in the past, not about the new vision for the fire department / paramedics. And you heard also, Mr. Bradley, how that the union is somehow involved in this presentation. When have the unions been dictating how many fire stations there should or should not be in Maplewood? They should be concerned about what are the working environment of the firefighters, paramedics. They should be concerned about the contracts, but whether or not there's the appropriate number of fire stations or what that response time is going to be, is that an appropriate item for them to weigh in on?
And also address the fact of structurally how the buildings are themselves.
Right.
As I pointed out earlier, pay attention. When you get to Gladstone, they keep downgrading it like it's not relevant, but it is the station that is of use right now and is being used on a regular basis.
And it's only 20 years old. So let's continue.
Comments that Commissioner Reinhardt mentioned this evening really resonated with me when she talked about some disappointment over lack of community engagement. And I really hope that we can demonstrate tonight that these decisions we understand are difficult, but they're based in data. They've been based in transparency, and more importantly, one of the pillars of our process has truly been community engagement. And with that, I'll give it to Chief Lucan.
Now, when I heard that spiel about community engagement in this whole process, I just had to start laughing, because we have reported on these news programs that, one, a couple of years ago, the City Council formed this committee to look at different proposals for the fire department, and they handpicked people to be on that committee from the community. They weren't necessarily people that were coming into it with no agenda. They were people that were known to the people putting them on this committee. And I believe, Mr. Bradley, that one of those people that served on that committee was William Knutson. Now, who's William Knutson? He just happened to be one of the people that this city council appointed to the council to fill the vacancy. Filling a vacancy that they didn't have to hold an election for, because they repealed the ordinance requiring an election for vacancies. So now we start to see some of the groundwork being laid for this big plan that has been somebody's big plan for a very long time. Whose, we don't really know, but it isn't necessarily to serve the people of Maplewood. So we've got this committee that was formed a few years ago. William Knutson is on there. He becomes the spokesperson and appears in front of the council a few times with their findings. He then becomes appointed to the council to vote on the very same thing that he was appointed to rubber stamp.
He didn't take himself off for conflict of interest, I take it.
I don't think that he withheld himself from voting. I don't believe he did. But let's continue with another thing I want to say is that the other point that was brought up about the public engagement is that they had a couple of open houses, and we went to one of those open houses so that we could see what the presentation was, what the participation of the community was, to try to get some interviews. And so the next few clips are from our attending one of those open houses and to demonstrate the public engagement. Let's take a look as we move through these next few clips.
Good to see you, Steve. I thought you had dropped out. I haven't seen you anymore. You must not be in good favor anymore.
I'm in great favor.
Okay.
Why did you say that?
I don't know, you used to be all over and now it's, you never see you at all.
That's because he has a full-time department now. He doesn't have to do everything. Okay. Probably don't go on quite as many, but still.
No, I mean, I don't see you anywhere, I mean, I'm not watching you at the calls, but I don't see you anywhere representing Maplewood. So I figured,
Oh, yeah. Those have been a lifesaver for.
Think about all the action.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the panning of the room. So in the first shot there, we see we've got 2 residents and 2 people from Maplewood staff. So now we got a ratio of 1 to 1.
Right.
The next shot we can see that there is in the background somebody from city staff. In the forefront, there was somebody from city staff and 2 Maplewood residents. Okay, again, we've got a ratio 1 to 1. Now, the next shot, of course, we were getting to. Well, let's take a look.
nothing.
Like your haircut.
Thank you.
Yeah, what are you doing for the
Thank you.
job?
Well, we do our TV show. I know that.
Still doing it?
Yeah.
Oh.
They, you know, the regime up there, Mary Abrams, the supposed mayor, you know, they took everything off. They shut down public access cable, like all authoritarians do, don't they? But so, you know, we're doing more than ever. There's a lot of communities that get to see it, but not Maplewood.
Oh, okay.
And of course, they took out visitor presentations too.
The other thing I was going to ask you too is, I was sitting here, I haven't seen Bob Zick forever. What's Bob up to?
Bob Zick is Mr. Grandma.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he would still be doing public access cable, but you know, he's got a lot of other responsibilities now.
I didn't realize that.
So I think he's,
Is he still living in North St. Paul?
you know, that's my understanding.
So Chief Lucan is more interested in talking about Bob Zick than actually talking about the consolidation plan, the purpose of the open house. He has a reporter right there in front of him. He knows he has a reporter there. He's asking about the programs, and yet instead of talking about promoting their consolidation program for the fire stations, he's all worried about, oh gee whiz, what happened to Bob Zick, another public access producer who had done news programs for over 25 years. Well, in the background, we saw that there was more city staff and the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams. So now in that shot, we saw no residents of Maplewood other than Marley Abrams, who's, well, you know, she's in the bag because it's probably her plan. So let's take a look at the next clip and see if we have more.
I haven't talked to him for months. I haven't really had much communication with him for years anyway, like 10 years.
Oh, really?
Or 15 years. But I think he popped up on that school district thing. You know, the 275 for Christina.
Oh, okay.
But he gave a good presentation on that.
Are you guys still going down? I know you guys were doing stuff down at the St. Paul School District too. Are you still-
Well, I never had been. I was only down there one time to film for his TV show. But
So again, he persists on talking about Bob Zick and what Bob Zick has been doing, rather than doing what you would think a fire chief would be doing, which is talking about his new policy and the new direction of the fire ambulance department. But again, looking in the background, we didn't see any new people coming in or milling around looking at the poster boards. Isn't that a little disturbing? Let's take a look at the next clip.
I always appreciated you in Maplewood. That's why there's that never-ending concern that these guys up at Maplewood.
No, I've really been busy. I've been around him, for the last month.
Right.
So I had a knee replaced, so I haven't been doing a whole lot. But
Right.
Otherwise, yeah, we're out and about in a lot of the city events, and all that kind of stuff. So
Oh, good.
yeah, things.
Do they have any events?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, we had the big bike rodeo here about a month ago for all the school kids. That
Oh,
turned
good.
out big. We had over 250 some kids there. Gave
Oh,
out
good.
free bike helmets to everybody.
Yeah, that's excellent.
That was a good
The one
success.
thing I have never understood on the bicycle issue is why don't they pass out those little red blinking lights
We do.
for free?
Yep,
Yeah,
we did.
they couldn't dump out enough of
Yeah,
those
well, actually, I should take. Yeah, they blink too. So
Yeah,
you get
the
them and you
blink.
hook onto the back, and it
right,
blinks red.
or
Yeah.
you hook them on anywhere.
Yeah, we gave out. I think we had like 500, and we gave out a lot of them.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, 'cause those are
If
like-
you ever need one, stop by. I'll
Okay,
get
thank
you.
you. Yeah, those are like very inexpensive.
Yeah.
So Chief Lucan says that he has been very busy for the last month, going to some programs, interacting with children. Also, it sounds like he's been busy handing out those little reflectors that you wear and should have on your bicycles, so that way other people who are on the roadway can see you, or on the trails can see you. Now, Mr. Bradley, I think it would be an important program that if Maplewood had these reflectors, which is indeed something important for safety, if they had them available for the public, why didn't they notify the public of that in their weekly newsletter or their monthly newsletter to let people know they could go to City Hall and get them for free? Wouldn't that make sense?
It would make sense, but there's so many other things they do that don't make sense either. That's the thing about our city hall here. And the one thing I did notice was that if you watched it real carefully, most of the individuals that were in the shots happened to have a badge on that said fire on it. So I believe that when you were looking at it, the numbers go way up for city admin when you're talking about that those are people also involved on the side of city operation.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
They are self-interested in getting a new station if they can get it. But the thing is, at what cost is the public being asked to pay for it?
Right, and it's certainly that the ratio of public versus the number of city staff people has gone up dramatically from the first couple of clips. Well, let's continue with the film footage.
Chief, are you guys going to give a presentation tonight? Okay, well, it's good to put everything out so people can understand, can synergize with everybody. They can build off other people's questions and see the big
We
picture.
got some information on these boards, and we're kind of just trying to engage with people and see what questions and concerns they may have and react to it.
Are you going to do the same thing when you have the next other meeting? No presentation.
I think it is going to be something like that.
Is this how you guys did in Columbia Heights?
Well, that was the police chief, and that was a sorrowful effort at engagement. He really didn't want to speak to the reporter. And by the way, the reporter is from our program Local News Report, Mr. Kevin Berglund, who lives in Maplewood. So certainly he has an interest in what's going on, not just as a reporter, but as a resident as well. But the police chief seemed to think that public engagement of having information on the posters and having them all milling around was sufficient for public engagement, that a presentation was not necessary. That might actually invoke more questions. And you noticed in that clip, we saw Brian Smith back in the background. It looked like in a kitchen area or some other little room area, not milling around with the 4 or 5 residents who were there. He's just back in the back room by himself talking to staff people. What kind of public engagement is that? Let's continue.
I am a black man south. Oh, okay. So I'm on the south side of nothing was there. And like, I ain't gonna get it. Because you're there, I did 100.
Well, now we have 2 new ladies have joined the open house. But again, you see the police chief feels very uncomfortable with public engagement. He's decided that he doesn't want to be too close to those residents because they might start talking to him. And heaven forbid. Let's continue.
Okay. Who should I ask that? Lucan? Okay, yeah. Nobody's coming around me, so. Hey, Chief, where this morning were those 2 fire trucks and 2 ambulances off to? They were headed down. I don't know, 8:15. They were headed down. They were headed down.
What color was it? White ambulances or red ones?
Well, I think it was ladder truck 3. You have a ladder truck 325?
Yeah. So we had EVOC, emergency vehicle operations training.
Okay.
Today. So
Where do they?
They do that in Dakota County,
Okay,
at
got it.
Dakota County Technical College down in
got it.
Rosemount.
Okay.
So they were convoying
Okay, got it.
down there.
That makes sense. How come, because I think a lot of people thought they would be doing a lot of the training up here at the Joint Powers.
We do about 90% of our training, and not actually probably more than 95%.
Okay.
The problem is we don't have the driving space to get through the qualifications. So down at there they have a skid pad that they water down and practice braking. And they have a big road course that takes up much more than that was one of the things we considered when we built the training facility. We just didn't have the room for it.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
yeah, the facility we want to use all the time, and that's where we schedule almost all of our training. But there's been 2 times this year we did some training with Excel Energy up at their training center.
Yes.
And then we do this.
Okay.
So
Once a year or
that
so.
does require us to leave. So.
Ironically, it just happened to be, now this goes to show you that when you're a reporter, you're on 24/7.
Yes.
You got to have your eyes open every single minute. It just happened to be that very moment, that very day, that in the morning I had a client appointment down in Inver Grove Heights, and I was on my way to my client appointment, and I see coming down Larpenteur, because remember I live on the west side of Maplewood, I see coming down Larpenteur, getting on the freeway, going south, 2 fire trucks and 2 paramedic trucks. And I'm thinking, well, they must be going to the 3M station because that is the route that the Maplewood Fire Department generally takes to get equipment from the central location to the 3M location, is that they go out Larpenteur, down 35E, and then to 94, and then over to 3M. That's the route they usually take, and I see them very commonly taking that route. Well, in this particular instance, they didn't take that route. Instead, they got on 52, the very same highway that I was getting off on. And I'm wondering, where are they going getting off on Highway 52? They continued across the Lafayette Bridge. And I'm thinking, well, they're bypassing St. Paul. Where could they be going? They continued on. I got off on my exit past 494, and I could see that they were continuing to go south, and I knew it had to be some type of training field trip. But we happened to find that that very night, there was the open house. What an excellent opportunity to find out exactly what training facility were they going to. So look at that. We've got the answer.
My question though is, I heard them state that they needed to have driver training. And I then thought to myself, I went to 916, which did most of your vocational type training, like truck drivers. They got a truck drivers training unit in that area. So why would they have to go all the way down to Cottage Grove if they could do it up in the White Bear facility
Right,
at
in Century College.
Yeah, at our community college, right up there on Century Avenue, yes.
Well, good question. We didn't ask that question, but maybe we wouldn't have been given the time to ask another follow-up question to this particular issue. But our reporter did ask another question that has been posed on these programs in the past. Let's take a look.
You guys are doing some construction work over there on the training center. Are you doing?
So no, part of that, the part of the land that we're not using,
Right.
is being rented out to Excel Energy right now.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they're just staging equipment essentially there
Okay.
for some of their projects. They have some big pipeline projects.
Right.
Century.
Yeah.
And,
Okay, got it. Oh wow. Okay, that makes sense.
How have you been?
Good, hanging in
Good.
there.
I like the haircut. It's firefighter
Okay.
style.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I'll be down there to apply on Monday.
I'll look for it.
Yeah. Well, very good. Thanks
Yeah,
for
good
that
to see you.
explanation.
Yeah. Let me
That was, of course, Chief Mondor, and he didn't have any problem engaging with the media, neither did Chief Lucan. The only one who had the problem with engaging with the media was the police chief. Why would that be? Why does he have a chip on his shoulder to the media? We don't know the answer, but perhaps it's something we'll determine at some point in the future. Now let's go back to our film footage from the council meeting of September 23rd, and we'll begin with Chief Lucan giving this historical perspective that he's going to disseminate to the public.
Mayor and Council, thank you. So I'm going to just give a quick overview to get us up to about 2016 and Chief Mondor will take it for the recommendations and such that came from the EMS Fire Work Group, which one of those was through the Fitch study, was to commission them to look into the staffing. In 2010, finding and retaining paid on-call firefighters for each station was becoming very difficult to find. And it was because the city was growing. You had the older part of the cities over the years, the newer part. And so really having trouble getting people who were stable in their homes. And we started seeing more and more of the younger people that we were getting and retaining them and being able to hold on to them longer than 2 and 2.5 years was becoming very difficult in the early parts of 2010.
There was something there that Chief Lucan said that made me raise my eyebrow. He said that part of the reason they had a problem recruiting individuals to serve on the paid-per-call fire department because there weren't stable people in their homes. Now, does that mean that they were looking for people to be homeowners, or that they felt that renters were not stable enough or committed enough to the community to recruit them to the paid-per-call fire department. I'm not quite sure what he meant by that statement. I can tell you, though, from my experience of having been the mayor of Maplewood, during the time when we had paid-per-call firefighters, that much of the reason that we had for not necessarily having the number of paid-per-call firefighters that we were looking to recruit come into the department was because the fire chief, Lucan, didn't like to do the recruiting all the time, to have to find individuals who would find this to be their best part-time job they ever had in their life. And that the idea of recruiting was something he wanted to get out of. That was something that he was proposing to my council the whole entire time I was in office, is that he basically wanted to get out of the recruiting business and just wanted to hire full-time firefighters and be done with all of that management of paid-per-callers. And that is more the reason why we started down that road of not getting the recruits that we needed. I don't think it was because there weren't enough stable people in their homes. Well, let's continue and see what else he has up his sleeve.
We started a strategic plan process to look at ways to staff our station using our current paid-on-call firefighters. In the beginning of 2011, we shared our strategic plan with the council and provided them with the following findings. Our findings showed that going to a part-time staffing model, having the paid-on-call firefighters sign up for shift and staff 3 stations around the clock would provide a greater number of firefighters on duty at any given time. We no longer had to find a firefighter that lived within the area of a particular fire station. We could take firefighters from any community, we could take all the paid-per-call firefighters we have, and they could work at any one of our 3 fire stations that we were going to have at the time, which in turn provided us way better coverage than we currently have.
So he acknowledges that switching then from pay-per-call to having more full-time and then actually scheduling the pay-per-call so that they were on a schedule, that resulted in a good response time for the community. Now keep in mind, when I was mayor, we had full-time firefighters also. So we had the pay-per-call and then we had the full-time guys and gals. So the whole model has been changing over time, but they keep changing it when they find out that the management is lacking. And that's really what part of the problems have been all along, is the failure of management. Well, let's continue.
To be. So after we took a good look, you have to remember some of the stations were built back in the early 80s. Actually, one of the stations, the Gladstone station down there, was built back in the 40s, and we had the Hazelwood station that was built back in the early 70s. So when those stations were built, in the East County Line station down on London Lane, when they were built around where the population was and where the people we could get who were paid per call or volunteers could make it to the station in a reasonable amount of time. So at that point then, we really took a good look and we made the determination that based on moving some stations and closing others, we could provide the same coverage and pretty much provide the exact same response time, if not better, by going down to 3 stations. We had many hours of community engagement. We had meetings at those stations we were going to close, and ultimately it came down to is that we decided to close the London Lane station and we decided to close the Parkside station. The Parkside station would be covered by Station 3, which is in Hazelwood, and the Gladstone station, and the other one was to do as we did, and we were so grateful to the council at that time for that, was to move the East County Line station that was on was on Century Avenue to where it presently is today on the 3M complex.
And that is the clip, Mr. Bradley, that you were alluding to earlier in the
Right.
program, where Chief Lucan talks about the Gladstone Station being constructed in the 40s. Now, when I was mayor, keep in mind I was elected in 2005, the term was 4 years. The Gladstone Fire Station was the current one that's in use today, the one that was built around the year 2000. Once that fire station was built, the old fire station sat empty and vacant for a number of years and was finally tore down like about 2003 or 4. And Fosberg took pictures of the tear down for the Maplewood Historical Society. But that building hadn't been used as a fire station since the year 2000 or so. So why he's putting that into this presentation as part of their rationale for making their changes back in 2010 is a little bit misplaced and certainly is not in the timeline. We have one last clip. Let's look quick.
Expectations of us having 3 stations. Well, our call volume increased. Our business has gotten busier. The types of calls have gotten different over the years and that, and we are now having, and we did earlier, have really troubles still getting part-time firefighters. Not only was it hard to get them and retain them again, but also other cities were starting to take our model of going to the part-time basis. So now they were stealing from us, we were stealing from them, and you can only use a firefighter so many hours in a day, no matter where they're at. And so it became a pretty significant issue as we went.
Well, he doesn't say anything about what the morale was. I mean, obviously, if other cities were adopting that model, they must have thought it was a good model. Otherwise, they wouldn't have moved towards it. It isn't like Maplewood is the pinnacle of success when it comes to fire department models. And it doesn't help that the fire department, that there was struggles and conflict within the fire department at that time that he's talking about. And you'll recall that when they decided that they no longer had anything more to do with part-time firefighters, they fired them all. The city of Maplewood, city manager Melinda Coleman, and the fire chief Lucan, they fired all the part-time firefighters. They gave them pink slips. Just like that. And you know, we have reported that when it happened on these programs, and we had a copy as well of the lawsuit when those firefighters sued the city of Maplewood as a result of that mass firing. But none of that is mentioned in any of this presentation, the historical presentation, as to why they are where they are today. The reason they are where they are today is because of poor management.
And when we add, I want to add one last thing here, because the fact is, the 6 minutes Chief Lucan had mentioned was with London Lane at the very south end. It had the East County line at the midpoint, and it had one of the 2 stations up at the north end. So when we're talking about
and there was also Parkside.
Right, and Parks, well, they had already talked about it's the 3 stations.
Oh, I see, sure.
So those were the 3 stations that were left after they had abandoned the Parkside.
Well, Mr. Bradley, we're at the end of our program. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And we will continue this discussion of the closure of another fire station in Maplewood next week. See you then. Bye-bye.